Episode 1 of Euphoria begins with a look at Rue Bennett's past life and descent into depression, with an increasing reliance on drugs and alcohol as she reaches her teenage years. The summer before junior high was spent in rehab, but she had no intention of staying clean. After getting out, Rue then continued to do drugs before we cut out and follow Nate as he drives along, taunting a girl on a bike who happens to be another character we're following this year called Jules. Jules happens to live in the suburbs but is new to the neighbourhood, finding solace in her friend Kat, whom she texts after trying to find a hookup with a stranger for the night on her phone. Her text to Kat then jumps perspective to a group of girls, one of which being Nate's ex, as they prepare for the upcoming party. From here we then jump back to Rue again, and she arrives home late and her mum berates her for leaving. Rue is forced to do a urine test to prove she's clean, but before she does, she heads to her friend's house to get a fresh sample. Jules then hooks up with a married man, whom we learn the true identity of later in the episode while Nate starts his party. A group of topless guys huddle around Chris McKay's phone, sharing nudes of a girl called Cassie, which causes him to feel uncomfortable and awkward. Later that night though, he hooks up with Cassie and things get heavy, leading to him becoming rough and choking her. A nod towards one of the themes of the episode, around substituting intimate sex for imitating porn. As we jump back to Rue, we see her taking drugs before stumbling out into the hallway. In one of the most iconic and gorgeous shots in the series, we see the hallway rotate in a full 360-degree angle while she scrambles up the walls and ceiling before touching the ground again. Rue stumbles downstairs, but the camera defiantly steers away from her, travelling into a room with Kat and 3 boys smoking weed. Struggling to fight against peer pressure and ridicule, she tells the boys she's not a virgin and she's pressured into taking her top off. Nate then calls off the party upon seeing his ex hooking up with someone else, but when he enters the kitchen again, he sees Jules, whom he takes his frustration out on. He questions why she's there and threatens her, prompting Jules to antagonise him with a knife before rushing out, where she comes face to face with none other than Rue. Now Rue and Jules head home together while we see our main characters sleep, which brings episode 1 to an end. Episode 2 of Euphoria Season 1 begins with a look at a little boy watching his dad's homemade porn videos. This little boy slowly becomes driven to perfect his body, growing up to become the jock we met in the pilot, Nate. With a fair amount of male frontal nudity, we see his college football life and blossoming relationship with Maddie over a slickly produced montage piece. We then cut back to see Rue and Jules begin to hit it off together. As school picks up again after the summer, Rue is forced up on stage to talk about what she's been up to during the break. The break she spent predominantly in rehab, of course. After fumbling her words a little, Rue picks out one memory that starts well enough, singing a song in a car, which quickly devolves into a drug-fueled, angry outburst at home over the words of Bobby Womack's "Fly Me to the Moon." Kat then receives a text that causes her chest to tighten. It turns out when she lost her virginity, it was recorded and put up for the world to see. She confronts the boys who uploaded it, threatening to go to the police given she's still a minor, so the story is then changed. This leads Kat into the principal's office, where he asks her if she's the girl from the videos. Kat accuses him of body shaming, which makes him backpedal and promise to do everything in his power to find the culprit. Nate meanwhile tries to patch things up with Maddie, offering to take her out on a date, while Jules and Rue grow closer together. However, things get heavy when Fez invites a dangerous man into the house while Rue is there scoring drugs. With a gun stuffed down the side of the sofa, Fez watches cautiously as the man offers her fentanyl, which is a powerful, quick-hitting drug. Things get pretty intense and the room silences to a hush as they await what Rue will do next. She prays to the heavens above to let her survive and she takes some fentanyl. On the warpath, Nate heads to the house of the guy who slept with Maddie and accuses him of raping a minor. Nate threatens him, telling the guy to get on his knees before beating him repeatedly in a bid to beat a confession out of him. Crying and whimpering, the boy refuses to admit to what he's done. After beating him to a pulp, Nate casually helps himself to a shower before putting his clothes back on and heading to Maddie's where he taunts her. After screwing her in an alleyway, he gives Maddie a present, an unflattering pink dress. Meanwhile, Rue begins to black out, and without the money to pay for her high, Mouse looks to take advantage of her until Fez steps in to pay. Unfortunately, he charges Fez double, a small price to pay, then allowing Rue to be screwed over. After Mouse leaves, Rue takes a turn for the worst, prompting Jules to help Fez drive her to her place, where she engages in a conversation with Shy Guy over text. Here we find out his name is really Tyler. Episode 3 of Euphoria begins with an introduction to Kat's past. Her childhood, weight gain, and loss of her first boyfriend Daniel act as a catalyst for what follows from there. We see her rise to the top of Tumblr, courtesy of her erotic fiction, before bringing us right back to the recent uploaded sex video. Determined to ride this wave of newfound internet fame, Kat dons a mask and twerks in the doorway, recording it for a porn site. We return to Rue this week, who decides to stay clean off drugs for a while. Not 60 days as the rehab centre would believe, but clean nonetheless. While she grows closer to Jules in this time, her best friend starts falling in love via text with Shy Guy, who happens to be Nate in real life. From here, Euphoria boasts a beautiful split screen shot of their text conversation as they continue to fall deeper into conversation together. They're not the only ones having text conversations though, as Kat starts talking to a guy online who's willing to pay her for a Skype session. Unsure how wiring money works, she heads off to ask Fez for advice on the matter. Now Rue continues to feel conflicted over her feelings towards Jules here, and on her way out of her house, she steals some narcotics and throws away 2 weeks of rehab for a quick fix. However, she comes across a man named Ali on her way home, who speaks some home truths about being clean and lying, prompting Rue to head home and spend time with her sister instead. Now meanwhile, Maddie prepares for her night with Nate, and after screwing around together, she checks Nate's phone while he's in the shower and, after a rather fruitless search for his messages, comes across an abundance of pictures of his penis. With renowned confidence following a Skype conversation with the strange internet guy, Kat dons a new appearance and rocks up at school a changed girl. While she continues to turn heads, Rue has a heart-to-heart with Jules here, ending with her leaning forward and kissing her before running out the room in shock. Unable to deal with her feelings, Rue heads to Fez's next for a fix, but he refuses to give her any more drugs after the incident with the fentanyl. The episode then ends with Rue phoning Ali, finally ready to properly be clean off the drugs. Episode 4 of Euphoria begins with a look at Jules' past, which happens to be more troubling than Nate's was. As a child, she was tricked into staying at a psychiatric ward by her mum. A gorgeous shot involving blurred imagery in the corners of the frame follows, where we see Jules' body image problems beginning. This unfortunately leads to her finding solace in cutting before we see her age through the years, eventually catching up to where we are now, with Jules in love and Rue by her side as her friend. As we cut back to the present, we find Ali and Rue discussing how she feels, and he likens it to a drug addiction, given her obsession with Jules. We then cut forward to the fairgrounds where all of our characters are hanging out, with an impressive one-shot scene that effortlessly moves between each of the teenagers. And Nate laments Maddie's provocative outfit here, and Nate tells Maddie to go home and get changed while the camera swings wildly across to Rue and Jules, who lock eyes and run up to one another, embracing in a long hug. Jules tells her things aren't weird between them, despite the kiss, and Rue breathes a deep sigh of relief. Meanwhile, Cassie feels humiliated when McKay tells Nate's dad that they're not dating, but he tries to explain to her why he said that. In the end, they go their separate ways, which throws Cassie into the path of Maddie, and the two decide to do MDMA together. Jules tells Rue that Nate's dad is the man she's been sleeping with, which is met with an incredulous laugh from her best friend. Rue doesn't believe her, of course, until Jules approaches the chili stand he's working at and things get awkward quickly. As the two then discuss the night's events, Rue receives a phone call from her mum, and it turns out Gia isn't answering her phone. As classical big band music dominates the audio, Rue and Jules rush around the crowded fairground to try and find Rue's little sister. Fireworks illuminate the sky, while Cassie winds up cheating on McKay with a boy on the merry-go-round. Maddie meanwhile confronts Nate over the pictures on his phone. Now Rue eventually does find Gia, hanging out with a group of guys and smoking weed. Seeing her become a mirror image of Rue at that age is a harsh reminder of how damaging drugs can be on a family unit, and Rue immediately senses this. She texts Jules to let her know her sister is safe, and as she receives the message, Nate's dad arrives and pleads with her not to ruin his life. She agrees and tells him she's not like that, much to his relief. While Rue and Gia head home together, Jules meets up with Tyler for the first time. Of course, Tyler happens to be Nate, and their meeting is a little awkward to say the least. This quickly turns hostile when Jules rejects him, and Nate threatens a child pornography lawsuit against her. She stands her ground though, throwing back an insult involving Nate's dad, whom she's been sleeping with. As their meeting turns sour, Jules heads over to Rue's for a sleepover, and after telling her the incident with Tyler was a flop, they embrace and start kissing. A stylish, horizontally rotating shot then ensues, showing Rue and Jules finally together, which brings the episode to an end. Episode 5 of Euphoria begins with a look at Maddie's past, from the glitzy beauty pageants through to her toxic relationship with Nate. It turns out she wasn't a virgin after all, and is actually quite the manipulator. As Rue narrates these scenes, we catch up to the present day, where Maddie was choked by Nate at the carnival. After this brief prologue, we begin with Rue missing drugs, but as a second prize, she focuses on Jules instead, almost obsessively so. As she begins to pleasure herself, Rue's mum bursts in, causing a slightly awkward and strangely humorous exchange between them to occur. Things appear to be on the up for Rue with her mum, and their relationship is finally beginning to rekindle without the wall of drugs between them. Unable to hide the raw red marks across her neck, Maddie is eventually found out at school. Given her Molly incident at the carnival and inability to eat thanks to her come down, at school she's called into the principal's office, where she's asked if Nate is the one responsible. Maddie doesn't crack, but he's determined, proceeding to quiz various kids around campus before calling Nate and his dad into the office. The night of the carnival saw Kat have an epiphany about men, prompting her confidence to skyrocket. An interesting bit of juxtaposing imagery follows as Kat stands next to a shop with a Calvin Klein model poster on. However, she's still angry at Ethan for what he did, so she hooks up with a random guy, leading to an intimate encounter in his car. Now Maddie's mother decides to press charges, much to the horror of her daughter. Cal, meanwhile, is told to speak to his son before doing anything else. He tells Nate to keep his head held high and not to pay attention to the people around him, as he's marched out of school and into the local police station. Now Maddie is taken down to the station as well, where she squares up to one of the officers after throwing a milkshake, before having her hoodie forcibly removed. We see the pictures of her neck in high definition, and it's not pretty. In a room next door, Nate is interviewed, where he tells her he grabbed Maddie by the arm but didn't choke her. He does tell the police she was high on MDMA though, but it's not enough to prevent Nate from being suspended. And juxtaposing Maddie's sexual history, we see Rue's self-confessed brief and embarrassing hookups with a lack of meaningful emotion. Besides what she's feeling with Jules, she's never really been in love. After a good talk with Ali at the rehab centre about this, Rue admits the real truth to everyone in the group. She wasn't clean all those times she said she was, and it's actually only really been 13 days. However, Jules is the one who's really helped her through this time. Later that night, Rue and Jules head to the roller disco together, but as her friend comments on Rue's euphoric mood, Jules freaks out and heads to the toilets. Cal heads back to the familiar hookup spot at the motel, but midway through his time with a random guy, he has second thoughts. He talks to him about the rage his boys are feeling and how scared he is they'll follow in his footsteps, wondering whether what he's doing affects them. While out driving, Maddie receives a text from Nate, telling her to meet him at the hotel off exit 27. Hopeful, she speeds up toward the rendezvous point, where we ironically find out it's the same hotel Cal left moments earlier. Nate and Maddie then meet and embrace, while Rue falls asleep on a terrified Jules. Episode 6 of Euphoria begins with a look at McKay's intense pressure from his father during his upbringing. This leads to him on the cusp of going pro in football, but ultimately missing out due to falling in love with Cassie and doing the math on his odds of actually making it into the NFL. However, tensions brew as McKay has issues with the way Cassie dresses, which opens up a rift between them that only seems to be growing. Meanwhile, Kat starts webcamming properly and making a solid chunk of money from it. Ironically, she heads to the Halloween party dressed as a nun, while Rue feels left out as the only sober one, sensing that something is off with Jules. The way she conveys this sickening knot in her stomach is really well written, and throughout the episode we see through Rue's sober lens the damage this is doing to her. With Nate's reputation completely shattered, he finds solace in Maddie here, hooking up with her while keeping an eye on everyone else from a distance. He then continues his crusade to besmirch Jules' reputation by printing out topless photos which he later uses to blackmail her. Now back at the party, Rue patches things up with Fez, but all eyes are on Cassie as she starts dancing with the boy from the carnival. Her and McKay's relationship is in a rather strange place here, and via a flashback we see him jumped by his roommates midway through having sex with Cassie, thrown on the floor and humiliated. As McKay uncontrollably sobs in the bathroom, Cassie texts Lexi and tells her what's happened. Composing himself, McKay arrives from the bathroom again, but this time the romance is all but gone between him and Cassie as they engage in an uncomfortable and hard to watch sex scene. We then jump back to the present, soon after, where Cassie takes the boy upstairs and things begin getting heavy between them, just as McKay walks in the front door to the party. Dressed as an angel, Jules stumbles outside and falls in the pool, prompting Rue to go in and save her. She spouts out lines from Romeo and Juliet, while Cassie has second thoughts about cheating on McKay. As she refuses the boy's advances, he throws down some seriously harsh words, telling her she's not interesting and wishes her good luck with her boyfriend. A musical montage then kicks in as we see all of our characters in various emotional states before seeing Nate head to Tyler's to give him a proposition. He's going to confess to choking Maddie, and to make matters worse, Jules is in on the act too, giving this statement some depth. Given she has incriminating photos held against her, Jules doesn't have much of a choice here, despite the policewoman telling her false evidence could lead to 7 years in prison. As it happens, this incident with the police and Tyler actually happened prior to the Halloween party, as Nate shows up with Maddie, much to the disdain of Jules, who looks on from a distance. Episode 7 of Euphoria begins with a look at Cassie's childhood. Her potential rise to ice skating fame fizzles out thanks to financial issues with her father, before we see Cass grow into a teenager. Here we see her good looks change everyone's perception of her. Family relations begin to break down though, and her dad falls off the wagon. This catches us up with present day Cassie, who takes a pregnancy test and stares into space, shocked. Yep, turns out she has a positive test. Tyler Clarkson is in prison for what happened to Maddie, while Rue goes on a mission to find out exactly what happened here, sensing there's more to the tale than meets the eye. Rue pieces together the clues and begins making some calls in a nice throwback to old detective thrillers. She smokes a cigarette and surrounds herself in pictures, figuring out about Jules and ironically finding herself riding a natural high because of it. Cassie tells the other girls that she's going to confess everything that happened with Daniel to McKay. Maddie tells her not to, while Kat chimes in by grilling Maddie about Nate. She curses Kat and laments her new attitude, prompting her to leave crying. Cassie asks Lex what she would do, and her sister advises her not to say anything. Rue has trouble adjusting to her mum's new boyfriend, and after a pretty awkward conversation between the two, Jules and Rue's relationship continues to sour, while Rue watches an obscene amount of Love Island. After visiting Fezco, she has hallucinations around the drugs laid out on the side, asking her to eat them. She manages to resist temptation though, but instead falls into a suffocating, endless loop of depression. And meanwhile, Jules gets on a bus and heads off to see old friends. Singing in a car, she hangs out the sunroof, completely carefree. As the camera swings smoothly around, Jules meets another friend and they put on makeup together while discussing their lives. High as a kite, Jules debates whether to text Rue before kissing a girl in the club, all the while cutting back to Rue, who continues to have issues with her kidneys. And Nate arrives soon after and apologises to Jules for everything. However, as the two begin kissing, it's here where we realise Jules is simply hallucinating and is actually the same girl as before. As she comes down from her high, she looks on with regret. Cass does eventually tell McKay she's pregnant, and the two discuss the ramifications of this on their future, while Kat has an uneasy webcam conversation with someone using a black screen and a voice distorter. And Nate and Maddie then show up at the petrol station Fezco works at. He asks Nate to stop going after Rue and squares up to him, prompting Nate to set his sights on the drug dealer. Unblinking, Fez tells him if he keeps messing with Rue and her friends, then he's going to kill him. However, later that evening, the police get a tip-off from Nate, who arrive at Fezco's while he and Mouse do their best to flush all their gear. The episode then ends with all of our characters taking a proverbial deep breath as the finale looms on the horizon. Instead of the usual narration introducing the history of one key character in the show, Euphoria's finale begins right at the heart of the drama, following Rue as she tackles her kidney infection. She refuses to take Vicodin and blissfully revels in the lack of responsibility she has in hospital while recovering. Life is good. Of course, this is fleeting at best, as Rue is sucked back into her teen angst as Jewel tells her about her time away, and they both curse Nate Jacobs together. It's a night of the winter formal at school, and most of the teens prepare excitedly for the big night. We see each of them getting dressed up at home, including Fezco, who dons a hooded jacket and eyes himself in the mirror before leaving with a loaded gun. Beautifully poetic narration from Rue's mum colours this portion of the episode too, discussing symmetry and balance as we cut, presumably, forward in time. It's a perfect recipe for what happens next, but we also see the episode structure become more unhinged the deeper down the rabbit hole we go. Now Maddie and Nate continue to experience issues in their volatile relationship here, dancing with other people only to find solace in their own crazed ideas of love. These two feel destined to be with one another, finding a strange addiction in their own chaos. In the midst of all this romantic angst, one good thing does come from the finale. Kat finally comes clean to Ethan about how she feels, and they decide to leave together while Cassie and Lex wish them the best. This happens to be the eye of the storm for the episode though, as everything around it spirals out of control. Rue catches up with Nate soon after and threatens him, telling Nate he can mess up his life, but Nate bites back, telling her she doesn't know everything about wild child Jules. Nate knows exactly how to hit Rue where it hurts though, digging into her own insecurities around her best friend and lover. This inevitably leads into Rue and Jules talking, as she asks whether Jules is in love before deciding to leave town together. As the episode reaches its crescendo, we cut between various characters as they hit breaking point. Cassie has an abortion, Rue and Jules tell each other how they really feel, while Fezco robs a high-ranking official. As he stacks wads of cash into a bag, unbeknownst to him, the man's son watches on from the hallway. It turns out the robbery was essential, a play to square things with his dealer before ending in bloodshed. Before Jules and Rue can leave town though, Rue has second thoughts, deciding this isn't a life for her. She says her goodbyes and watches as the train leaves the station, both metaphorically and physically. After her stint with drugs, everything appears to be coming into perspective for Rue, and one final montage sees her understand the damage her drug addiction has had on her family. However, this happens to be a bit of a double bluff, as the final scene of the finale sees Rue return to a life of drugs, beginning her slippery slope all over again. Thanks for watching, and do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Smash a like or subscribe to the channel, your support is very much appreciated. I'm Greg Wheeler, and from all of us over here at The Review Geek, we'll see you on the next video.